Hello again and welcome to From the Deep. I am Book of Brett and today we are doing a new series that Mike the Finder and I are calling The Graveyard Shift. This is going to be a series where him and I do solo reviews in addition to the podcast, and this is going to be a little bit more short form. Before we get into this review, I do want to just say spoiler alert, we are going to be getting into details here because I don't think this is a movie that can really ruin itself anymore, and I can't really do much damage by spoiling anything for you. So I do just want to let you know there are going to be spoilers in this review. And so with all of that said, let's get into today's review. Today we are reviewing 2022's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Not the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And this falls into a genre of movies that might be my least favorite right now. I'm sure something will come up that will take its place, but this is apparently called a requel. Not a prequel, not a sequel. A requel is apparently where they take a movie, they take the subject matter, and then they just do whatever the fuck they feel like doing with it. It doesn't follow an existing plot line. It doesn't fall in any part of the canon. It doesn't fall in any sequential order whatsoever, other than they took the idea of something and then they redid it. And it's not a remake, because a remake is where you take the basic story of a movie that exists already and then you adapt it to a semi-new idea, or you put a spin on it or something like that. Not in this one. In this one, we have four friends: Dante, Lila, Mel, and then Dante's fiance, who I can't remember the name of because she may be one of the most unforgettable characters in this whole movie.
We're idealistic individuals who
Dante and Mel are two chefs that are going to Harlow, Texas, which falls in Hooper County. I thought it was pretty cool that it's called Hooper County because the name of the guy who created the Texas Chainsaw Massacre way back in the mid-70s was Toby Hooper. What they've done is they've created posts on Instagram, which are quote-unquote blowing up.
Mel, check out our post. It's blowing up.
And if you look at them, they have like 2,200 views, so I wouldn't consider that blowing up. Somehow, this has gotten them to reach out to a ton of investors that are going to Harlow to basically revamp the town. And part of this is Dante and Mel opening up a restaurant there. The first issue I have with this movie is the basic concept of them going to this nowhere shithole town that is hours away from any major area. I mean, granted, they do make a comment that, you know, a small amount of money for what you're getting, especially compared to Austin, where they're coming from. This is going to be a little nitpicky, but fuck it, I don't care. This insane idea that they somehow convinced a bunch of people to revamp a town that's not near anything. Who's gonna come? Who's gonna come? And it wouldn't be such a big issue if it wasn't the premise of why they are there. From the very, very beginning, I knew I wasn't gonna like Mel. I will say, I did hear from someone that this was a quote-unquote woke Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which in of itself, I don't really have an issue with. If messages like that are jammed down your throat and they're not done creatively, I have a little bit of an issue with that, and that's kind of what I thought we were gonna get here. I will say, we don't really get that too much. There are a couple instances, but in the grand scheme of things, it really kind of makes sense. You've got a younger generation that is a woke generation. That term gets thrown around, I think, in a negative light a lot, but it's not a negative thing, I don't think. So I went into this kind of expecting that a little bit. I will say Mel is an insufferable and I was like this when I was younger, so I can't shit on it too much. She's one of these like quasi-revolutionary, pretending to be open-minded while harshly judging everything and everyone around her. That I had a little bit of an issue with just because it's a really, really annoying character flaw. People like that are just annoying to me. The way she interacts with her sister is very, I know best. She even says, I know better than you do. You can't take care of yourself. The very opening scene is her judging this guy Richter for having a gun on his hip.
Who has such a small they need to walk around in public with a gun? Like,
don't get me wrong, I'm a very liberally minded person when it comes to a lot of politics, and I hate to bring politics up in a movie review, but you're coming to his town. That's the culture there. By going to someone else's place and going, I know better than you. That was really annoying, and it kind of carries throughout the whole movie. It gets a little bit better throughout the movie, but I think that's because her character development ends up getting kind of masked by just all the gore and the horror that's going on. Lila, they they also use for social commentary, but I think it's actually done in a pretty decent way because we find out that Lila was involved in a school shooting. She has a lot of issues with guns. It's caused her a lot of trauma. It's part of why Mel is so defensive about this guy having a gun. And so the way Lila is about guns, it makes sense for Lila's character. And I guess in a sense, it makes sense for Mel's character to be so defensive about that because she's defending her little sister. So I can kind of get that. But again, that's why I'm saying it's not so much that she has an issue with this guy having a gun. It's just social commentary from the very, very beginning. And so it does set kind of a weird precedent. But it's just another facet of her really insufferable attitude. I think that was a big problem that I had with that. Now, in the background, what we have Sally Hatley or Hartley. I can't remember her last name, but it's Sally. She's actually based on the character from the original who survived. After surviving Leatherface and being the only survivor, she went along and became a Texas Ranger and apparently has been hunting down Leatherface for the better part of 50 years. That, to me, is where I, again, have an issue with this whole requel idea. Like, you want to use it as a requel, but really, it has aspects of a sequel. So it just created this really weird vibe through the whole movie. It's not supposed to be a sequel, but you're going to take a character from the original, give her a backstory, say what's going on with her, have her come into this movie, but change all the aspects around it. For example, she's been hunting Leatherface for 50 years, but somehow Leatherface is still what appears to be a 40-something-year-old man. Like, he's not decrepit, he's not old, basically the same age roundabout of Leatherface back in the 70s, and it's just glossed over. They don't mention it. It's never brought up. It's never said that, like, this is the progeny of the original Leatherface, which, I mean, would have brought up a whole other mess of issues, like how did he have offspring? It just doesn't make any sense. If you were chasing him down 50 years ago, why isn't he in the house that he was in before? Why isn't any of the family there? And it's fine that they're not in it if you're going to make a requel, but you're not making a requel. You're making a requel with aspects of a sequel, which makes for a really stupid layout. It's done with so much liberty and freedom that it's not creative, it just feels lazy. And this that we have now, this requel bullshit, is not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination. It does have good aspects. The special effects are awesome. We see a lot of gore in this. Not a lot is left to the imagination, which can be good, it can be bad. I think it's done really well in this. Some of it's really over the top, like at the beginning when Leatherface and his, I guess, foster mom, they're in the sheriff's van, and when she dies in the van, Leatherface loses his shit.
Obviously.
And he attacks the sheriff. And what happens is he grabs the sheriff's arm and he just snaps it and breaks it. That's not how arms work. There is a bus scene. Leatherface just goes on a slaughter rampage through this party bus, and it's just a bloodbath. This is kind of in Act 2 where shit's really starting to hit the fan. Leatherface makes his way onto this bus. He's decapitating people. He's cutting people in half. Limbs are going everywhere. Blood is splurting everywhere. It is an intense scene. It's not worth watching this heap of a movie just for that scene, but that scene did at least kind of bring me back in and make me interested in it again. Now, the other part of this movie that was really, really cool was the very ending. As I said before, there are going to be spoilers. The very, very end, like the last scene, not the post-credit scene, and just a heads up, there is a post-credit scene. It makes no sense, doesn't need to be in there, but we live in the day and age of post-credit scenes that don't have to make any sense. The ending where Mel and Lila are making their way out of town and it seems like everything's fine and they're getting away, and then Leatherface comes and rips Mel out of the car, puts her on her knees in the middle of the street and just slices her head off. Like, this is another part of what I'm talking about where the special effects are really cool because we see everything. Part of the ending that's really cool is we do get the chainsaw dance that we had in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He's swinging his chainsaw around and everything. That was a really cool homage to the original, so I will give it that. But this movie can't touch the original. It can't touch the rawness, the intensity, or the ferocity of the original. You don't get any of that in this movie at all. A big part of why the original did so well and was so enjoyable as a horror film, making you uncomfortable, making it intense, making you sit on the edge of your seat, a lot of that was because of the production and everything, which is not necessarily a great thing. I would lean towards it being more of a bad thing in the sense of the environment that they were filming in and everything. However, you can't argue with the end result. With a horror movie, when you've already got this emotional response to the environment that you're in, it's gonna come out on camera. And so that's a big part of why the original was so amazing. These actors were frustrated. They were pissed off. They were kind of miserable. And I'm not condoning treating people that way, but again, you can't argue with the end result. The reason that worked so well is because it didn't rely on gore. It relied on real fear. You really felt like you were watching these people go through this, and so much of it was because of the camera work. In the lighting, it was grungy, it was dirty, it was really unforgiving. He would have gotten a PG-13 rating by today's standards because the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre has almost zero gore. The only gore in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is when Leatherface trips and falls or stumbles over something and the chainsaw splits his leg open. Even when the character's getting put up on the meat hook, we don't actually see it go in. We do see it in the remake from the early 2000s, but even that was an amazing movie. And the reason it was amazing was because it was true to the original for the most part, with a new spin on it, and it took itself very seriously. They wanted to make a good movie, not just a good horror movie, not just an exciting or gut-wrenching horror movie. They wanted to make a good movie. Now, the character of Sally is, of course, not played by the original actress who originally played Sally, because sadly, the original actress passed away back in 2014. After the way she was treated on the original movie, I don't know if she would have been up for doing this again anyway. But the character of Sally in this is very akin to Jamie Lee Curtis's character in Halloween. She wants to take revenge on Leatherface. She's been hunting him down. Somehow, in a town of what I can only assume is 3 people, she was never able to find Leatherface. You can look at Richter and go, that's not him. You can look at the old lady and go, that's not him. And then you can look at Leatherface and go, hey, that's fucking him. Especially since he hasn't aged in 50 years. And this whole revenge thing just doesn't work. And I don't know if it's because the idea of getting revenge on Leatherface just doesn't work in general. When Sally comes into town and Mel and Lila jump into her truck, rather than empathizing with the way these girls are being treated, with the trauma they've been through, which she can clearly empathize with, her reaction is not, let's get these girls to safety. She goes, no, you have to stay here. I have to go get revenge. What an unbelievably selfish thing to do. And that's another big issue with this movie, is so many of these characters are so unlikable. Dante's okay. Lila's okay. I kind of feel for her a lot. Sally is just super unlikable with her whole revenge thing. There are 2 scenes with Sally that are just ridiculous. First of all, she goes into the house that Leatherface is in, has him at gunpoint with the shotgun, and simply because he doesn't remember her, she just doesn't kill him and just lets him pick up his chainsaw and walk out the door to continue doing what he's been doing this whole time. It doesn't make any goddamn sense. The other part that doesn't make any sense is how she takes a fucking chainsaw to the stomach, gets lifted up 6 feet into the air, dropped back down, and somehow lives through it long enough to shoot him one more time 15 to 20 minutes later. Now, unfortunately, I could go on and on about this movie, but we are trying to keep this to a more short form format. There are several other things about this movie that are super unenjoyable, that are super dumb, that just don't make sense, that just make it a very lazy cash grab of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So do yourselves a favor. If you do watch this movie, go watch the original. If you've never seen it before, if I did miss anything that you noticed that you just thought was stupid about this movie, if you disagree with me, leave it down in the comments. Let me know what you thought of this movie, what you liked, what you didn't like. Let's start a conversation about this and have a back and forth, because that is really what Mike and I want to do with this channel, because that is the great thing about movies, is we all have different opinions about them. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you like the content that we're putting out on the channel, hit the subscribe button. And until next time, I will see you guys later.